We've seen a tremendous amount of money just sort of disappear in this industry. And I think there's more to come. Generating that profit in this industry during challenging times like this, I think is going to be that much more difficult. We say this in the US, or at least people are talking about it, about a K-shaped economy recovery, right? Where you've got this upper end that's doing well and the lower end that's not doing well, and it's sort of going in two different directions.
The S&P 500 and the tech-heavy NASDAQ have set records, but that is only part of what's happening.
Companies at the top that are successful, that understand the value of marketing and direct marketing, valuable content and guest experience and hospitality and tight operations, and really honing in on the financial side of it. And then we're going to have a bottom part of the industry that is really focused on OTAs, and they never really got to sort of that professional level of trying to grow and scale the way that a true business would. But I think the bigger challenge, and I'll fall on the sword here.
Property management at scale is about more than just rent rolls and maintenance calls. It's about protecting your assets, delivering stellar guest experiences, and scaling operations without losing quality. Welcome to Minute by Minute, the show where industry leaders share unfiltered stories, proven strategies, and real solutions for operating at scale. I'm your host, Nils Mattisson, CEO of Minut, and together we will dive deep into what it really takes to keep your properties safe, efficient, and protected. Let's get started. Today we're thrilled to welcome Adam Norko, a growth strategist, operator, and one of the sharpest minds in the vacation rental and PropTech ecosystems. Adam is the founder of VR Growth, where he helps STR, SaaS, and hospitality tech businesses scale for better alignment between sales, marketing, and ops. Adam's journey spans the US Marine Corps, real estate investing, and senior leadership roles at companies including PointCentral, Breezeway, and Inhabit. With more than 15 years in the short-term rental and hospitality tech space, he's seen the industry from every angle. He is known as the philosopher on the Art of Hospitality podcast for his ability to connect big-picture thinking with practical revenue-driving systems. In this conversation, we'll dig into why so many STR businesses break as they try to grow and what it really takes to build systems and adopt tech that protects your portfolio as you scale. Adam, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Nils. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate those kind words.
Let's kick off with a bit about your journey. You've gone from Marine Corps leadership to real estate investing and then into STR tech. What first pulled you into this industry?
Yeah, my background is varied. I've done a lot of different things, and as you peel the onion back, you'll get more and more layers. I think it had a lot to do with me not necessarily having a clear direction, but also just feeling like I wanted to get a wide variety of experiences, and that led me into the industry here. And I think, like a lot of people in the industry, we have this story about, it was an accidental start in the industry. And that was definitely my case as well. I had stayed in some vacation rentals. I live in the Outer Banks in North Carolina. I'd stayed in a couple. And when I did, I really loved the Outer Banks. And I was living in Charlotte at the time, flipping some homes, as you mentioned, from a real estate investing perspective. Decided that I wanted to get more of a concrete role and get out of Charlotte. It was just not a place that I saw myself for an extended period of time. And, I think that as we look at the world economy today, there's probably a lot of people that are out looking for work, whether it's AI related, the economy related, whatever it is. What I would suggest, based on what I'll say next, is you just got to keep going and keep putting resumes out there. I think at the time I was single, I was living by myself, and I really wanted to get back to a beach somewhere. And I put out resumes, I think over 300 companies at any sort of beach that had waves where I could surf. Luckily enough, I landed on the Outer Banks, which was a perfect spot. My family had already migrated from the Northeast and outside of Boston down to Virginia. My sister and her family and my parents were all in Virginia. So the Outer Banks was a perfect scenario. And I landed a job as a director of marketing for a vacation rental company here on the Outer Banks. Managed about 350 homes, Seaside Vacation. They since have sold to a private equity group. But it gave me the first perspective of being inside of the vacation rental industry, but more importantly, inside of an industry that was quickly maturing. I came in 2008, and the shift was happening from print, with everybody back at that point still had these really big binders that they would send out, or magazines, I guess is a good way to say it, that they would send out to all of the guests, the past guests, on the annual basis. And that's really how the majority of reservations happened. They would happen around the holidays. People would pick up the magazines, go through them, and then call into the front desk and talk to the reservation team and make reservations. So when I came in, that shift was happening onto the website. And that's where I stepped into the industry, was the ability to move from about 90% print ads to about 90% online marketing. And I made that shift happen really quickly in about a year. And we saw really strong uptick from a marketing perspective. We managed about 250 homes at the time, and we were beating out companies that had 1,000 plus homes on the Outer Banks because we were thinking differently. We were thinking about where that next step was. So it was perfect timing, a little bit accidental in the sense that I wasn't necessarily trying to get to vacation rentals, but I did see this as an opportunity to a new industry to focus on marketing. So not entirely accidental, but it was a great stroke of luck for me to get here. And then once I was here, I saw the biggest opportunity being this industry that really no one knew about. I can remember back in sort of that 2008 timeframe, looking at a Focusrite study, and they said something to the effect of like less than 2% of the traveling public in the United States even knew what a vacation rental was. So fast forward 15 plus years, and we know that story has changed. But I could see that the potential was there. The experience in a vacation rental is tremendously better than the experience in a hotel. And I saw it. It was just, how can we get the general public to understand that? So that's sort of been that my next 15 years was trying to spread that word.
It's a great industry in that it tends to reinvent itself quite frequently, right? Like, and 2008, it's easy to forget now, but that's sort of almost pre-Airbnb. I think they might have launched, but certainly didn't have much.
Nobody knew about them, that's for sure.
Much reach.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what are some of the other things that you've seen change over that time? Obviously, like the switch from offline to online must have been like a huge transformation. But is there anything similar that we've also gone through?
Yeah, well, I think you're right in the sense that it has continued to reinvent itself. And I look back on it and I wonder, is it truly reinventing itself? Is it maturing of the industry? Is it the changes in technology that are happening around us? Are all of those things coming together to reinvent itself? I don't think as if the industry or operators are necessarily internally saying, hey, we're going to reinvent what we're doing. I do think that this is an industry where people try to stay pretty focused on how they've done in the past, which is probably a benefit and a challenge. But the way that I've looked at it is there has definitely been these reinventions that have continued to happen. So from print to online is such a huge shift that I think that the entire world was going through it. But the way that it changed this industry was tremendous. All of the descriptions that I gave you with the books that they would mail out and the reservations team that are 30 plus deep taking phone calls, shifting that to online and shifting reservations to online, and then thinking about all of the challenges that come with the workforce and trying to figure out what to do with that workforce as these changes happen. I think that's a component of the shift. But if I look back through the years, I think it's marketing was the first shift. As you mentioned, Airbnb was not even understood or nobody knew what it was at the time. It was HomeAway or Vrbo, which is now Vrbo, which is VRBO. Those two were the online platforms that people focused on, but it was mostly the individual homeowners that were focused on those platforms. It wasn't even the property management companies that were doing it. We were trying to figure out how maybe we could do that. So I think the shift to online and then the shift to OTAs was such a tremendous shift. And then in addition to that, at the same time, I shifted out of marketing with the vacation rental company and into the tech and vendor side of the space. And I think that's where a lot of the changes started happening as well. The property management systems have changed tremendously over the last 15 years. There was just a handful back in 2008. They're not even really in existence. They were server-based systems where you had to have the servers in the office. I mean, it's changed tremendously. The functionality has changed tremendously. So I think the PMS side has definitely shifted. And then I think where I moved to was similar to Minut. I moved over to smart home control and smart tech, keyless access, all of those pieces with PointCentral and Alarm.com. I think that was a significant shift. And as I mentioned, it was one of those ones where the industry sort of fought you. So it wasn't as if the industry was saying, oh, yes, this is the new invention and we want to go down that path. No, they fought it every step of the way. I had to convince a lot of people that keyless access was where this was going. And smart home control, I think there's value. I think the industry is still trying to figure out where some of that value is. I definitely see the value in it. But keyless, once COVID hit, was just, it took off. I had moved on to Breezeway and operations software, then Inhabit at that point. But I can see that we were laying the groundwork for that to take off once the need was there and COVID was the need. And that took off really quickly. From there, I think it's, again, on the tech side, it's the operations software. And this is my path, but I do believe that it's also the path of the industry. So what I always tried to do was think one or two steps ahead and try to figure out where is the industry going and how can I get there before it does so I can help pave the way. So from there, I think operations software was really the biggest change in the industry. Having a a handle on what's happening out in the field, and we can talk about the challenges that are related to that. But having a handle on what's happening in the field really quickly totally changed the industry. The understanding of when the guests checked out and when the cleaners and inspectors had done their job and how to communicate that information back to the office in a really quick way, that is changed the industry and operations tremendously. And ultimately the guest experience and then the homeowner experience by tracking all of that history has changed things tremendously. And then lastly, I think it's COVID, and along with COVID came a huge influx of outside money. The private equity that has come into this industry, I think, has had a significant impact, and we could talk pros and cons around that. But I think that's one of the shifts that we're starting to face now. And then as you get on the other side of that, you get on the other side of COVID, and you get on the other side of all the PE that's come in here. I think that's the place we are right now. And I think the shift, in my mind, the shift really, and a little bit focused on where I am, again, trying to think a couple steps ahead. It goes back to where I started, actually. I think one of the biggest opportunities in the industry today is around marketing. I think that everyone got really, maybe I won't say lazy, but we put our focus in other areas after COVID. The supply went up. Guest bookings were coming in really easily. So as a result, we didn't focus on marketing and driving direct bookings and having a really strong guest experience because we didn't need to have those things. We were focused on the revenue growth and the company growth and trying to meet the demand that was coming at us faster than what we could expect. And as a result, we backed off a lot of the foundational pieces of the industry that were started back in 2008 or even prior to that. We got away from a lot of those pieces. And I think now we're in this point in the industry where we're trying to figure out how do we recapture those pieces. And we say this in the US, or at least people are talking about it, about a K-shaped economy recovery, right? Where you've got this upper end that's doing well and the lower end that's not doing well, and it's sort of going in two different directions. I think that's happening, and I'm starting to think about it in the industry from a K-shaped vacation rental industry. I think we're going to have companies at the top that are successful, that understand the value of marketing and direct marketing, valuable content and guest experience and hospitality and tight operations, and really honing in on the financial side of it. And then we're going to have a bottom part of the industry that is really focused on OTAs, and they never really got to sort of that professional level of trying to grow and scale the way that a true business would. And I think we're going to see this big gap between those two. And the ones that I believe will succeed are the ones that are focused on all those foundational pieces.
Super interesting. And how do you think about sort of the dynamic between a smaller property manager or even like a small host versus like a larger company? You started with a large company and then described how all of these new pieces of software and tools became available. And the way I see a lot of that is that they actually lowered the barrier to entry, because suddenly even like a small operator could run a best-in-class tech stack and start competing with larger ones. So the barrier to entry is sort of lower than ever, but at the same time, there are still economies of scale. So how do you see that dynamic play out, and how has it changed?
Well, and as a side note, I've seen the industry from a lot of different perspectives. As you mentioned, inside of a larger organization, a few of them. But then my wife and I manage, we host through Airbnb a handful of properties here on the Outer Banks. So I understand it from the small host perspective as well. And I think that at this point in the industry, quality is where everybody should focus. So if we think about large versus small, and the industry loves to sort of think about number of property as maybe what we measure the value or the success of a company is. And I think that that's shifting as well. I think quality over quantity is, in a lot of different ways in the industry, is where we should put our focus. And I do think that that's happening. And I say that because a lot of times we think of these smaller managers as maybe not as professional, but that's not the case in a lot of places. I think that there's huge opportunity for quality managers, quality hosts to really focus on smaller quantity of properties and really a quality of the property, a quality of the guest experience, a quality of the operations that they have. And I think there's a bigger upside when you do that. There's not just the value of having a more hospitality focused business. I think you do that because there's a larger upside, and the companies that don't do that, I think they're the ones that are going to have a challenge with it. So to answer your question a little bit more specifically, I do think that there's differences from large companies to small companies, especially on scale, especially on adoption of technology and the value of that adoption. However, I think that a professional mindset in the industry, and this is what I've continued to go back to, I think it's more about mindset than it is about the tools or the size. I think if we go in with a professional mindset around guest experience, high service, high hospitality, really focused on the homeowners and making sure that the homes are quality, and the homeowners, there's a lot of transparency between the manager and the homeowners, and getting this really tight circle around the property manager and around the community that you're building, from a guest, from a homeowner perspective, from the wider community where you are managing, making sure that you have all the right foundational pieces around safety and regulations and good stewards to the community and partnering with the right people. I think that's the future of the industry. And I'd put that aside from a size perspective. I think anyone can do that and you can do it well, but you've got to have the right focus. In fact, I'd argue that if you're too focused on growing, if you're too focused on scaling, you probably miss a lot of those foundational pieces. And I'd say it's probably in your better interest to slow down from a scaling perspective and get at this point. I think earlier, 5 years ago, it would have been different. Like, let's scale and grow as fast as we can. But at this point, I think that it's better to have really solid foundation than it is to chase any sort of size metrics that people might be talking about.
This is a theme that I've picked up over the last year or so. Like, I was at a conference in Rome a couple months back and sat in at the round table, and I had been at the same conference a year prior. When property managers were describing their businesses, they were actually using revenue numbers, whereas 2 years ago maybe they would have told me how many listings they have.
Yep.
And I picked up on this with one of them, and he said, we've actually decreased our number of listings, and been a lot more ruthless in terms of figuring out which ones are profitable and which ones aren't, and focused on the ones that are. And, he said they've actually been able to grow their, both their revenue, but primarily their profits by, doubling down on those things that are like a little bit special. And I think that it goes to your previous comment about there maybe being like a little bit more supply now compared to the sort of post-COVID boom. And when there is like a little bit of oversupply, like, competition gets that much harder. But it does seem like there is a willingness to pay a lot of extra for that extra experience, and that's what's paying off at the top end of the market.
I'd make a couple comments around that. One, I'm very happy to hear that trend that you're seeing around revenue. And I'm even more happy to hear you say profit and not just revenue. I think that's been lost in this industry for a long time. I think we need to get back to the focus on profit, not just revenue. And we should especially not be focused on the top line revenue of how much a company is generating through reservations, especially when they're going to give away 80% of that to the homeowners. We should stop saying we're, a $10 million company when the reality is we're operating off of $1 million. And now we got to figure out all the expenses and things that come from that. I think profit is going to be exceptionally important as we go forward. This industry doesn't make sense if operators aren't profitable, if homeowners aren't profitable, and ultimately if the guests aren't getting a good deal on that. Now, I think you're also spot on with the idea that the way to stand out is going to be doing those special things. And special, unfortunately, in this industry, special at this point might be some basic customer service things, right? I think that we got away from that because it was just easy to get away from it. But I think the faster that we get back to that, the faster we get back to really customer service, I think at the end of the day, this industry, hospitality, service, is a service industry. Yes, we have a product. Yes, we have a home. But to your point around supply, it's a bit of a commodity. And, we could make the argument that, a home that's really nice or new construction or the right amenities, it might stand out. And it might. I think that, you'll get a few more reservations from that. But I think the reality is that businesses grow and the homes are successful and the guests come back because of the service that they get when they're there. So it's that relationship that you're building with the guests and then the relationship that you're building with the homeowners. I think that's what will help companies continue to grow. And I do think you're right. One, that people are probably willing to pay a little bit more for that. And that could come in a variety of ways, right? It could come from homeowners not negotiating as hard with you because you have such a great reputation of being great customer service and having this transparency with homeowners. Well, maybe that's not you got a higher commission than you would have normally, but they didn't negotiate with you or leave to go somewhere else. So that's a win for you. I think the other side of it is maybe you're not raising your prices, but you're also not lowering them as you get closer because guests are going to come. Or more importantly, and I think this is probably the most important aspect, is that guests are going to come back when they have that relationship and they understand the quality that you give them. That's how you build repeat guests. And one of the biggest factors, as I mentioned with marketing and, sort of the K-shaped industry that I'm seeing, is that everyone recognizes the OTAs. One, are taking too much control. Two, are taking too much of their profit and revenue from them. They want to get off them. but it's a huge jump. If you focused entirely on OTAs or even just a strong portion of your inventory on OTAs, to jump from that to the idea of spending on marketing and dedicating resources to marketing is a big jump, because the OTAs, you pay them, but you know that you got the reservation. With direct marketing, you've got to go out and spend it and do the work before you're going to get it. So there's this really big chasm that people are having a hard time jumping. Well, one of the best ways to do that is by increasing your repeat guests. So if you offer this great service and the guests come back, that takes a huge weight off of the industry and off of your business's shoulders, because now you're not working as hard to get those guests. It's always going to be less expensive to get the ones that come back versus going out and finding some new ones.
Let's talk about tech in that context, with profitability, and maybe, dare I say it, like property managers going back a little bit to the basics before the OTAs were so big and reaching their guests that way. So what part of this quite sprawling tech stack that we've seen grown out over the last, say, 10 years, what part of that does still make sense in a world where you focused on profits rather than revenue scaling?
Well, man, I think that's the question of the day in a lot of ways. And I think that the industry is seeing that, as you've mentioned, sort of the trends that you see as you talk with people or as you go to conferences. That's a trend that I've been seeing as well, is people trying to simplify what their tech stack is. And I think that there's a cost component to that, and we'll circle back to that in a second. But I think it's also just the operational load that comes with all of this different tech. It's the adoption of the team, and it's whether or not it's being used, or whether or not you're using a tool to its fullest capability, or whether or not there's redundancies across all of these different tools that you now layered on top of each other. I think there is a real need to simplify and understand that this is a tech stack that is simple, that we can use, that our team will adopt, that our guests will adopt, that our homeowners will adopt. I think there's a lot of value in that simplification. With that comes the cost side of it. And I think that, as we're talking about, as the industry changes, I think focusing on expenses is going to become more and more important. The OTAs are one of those areas that have a huge chunk that if you can do that better, then obviously you're going to get better revenue and better profits. But the other side of that is probably tech is probably the next area that a lot of managers are focusing on, and how to reduce that tech. I'm a believer in simple just in general. The challenge with simple is it's not necessarily easy. And I think that coming up with a simple tech stack and saying this is all we really need is really difficult from a number of different areas. One, because there is a lot of overlap in different tools, and you got to figure out what are the ones that I absolutely need that I don't have to have this overlap. But I think the bigger challenge, and I'll fall on the sword here, I've been in the vendor side of it, selling tech into this industry for a long time now. I've always tried to focus on the value and the profitability and how I can improve operations or guest experience or overall revenue. Whenever I've sold something, I've tried to find whatever that is and make sure that it's a good fit. But I think that the proliferation of the technology has been really difficult in the industry because it confuses the market. And I think that you've got either people that maybe oversell functionality or don't fully understand it, or when you look at the demo, it's not entirely what it's going to be like when you go out and you actually start to use it. So as a result, I think that you've got these bloated tech stacks that have grown because the money was there and the tech was there. And as a result, you've got a lot of these managers that have too much tech. And then on the other side of that, you've got, I think, the lower end of the market that isn't really leveraging tech as much because they might be leveraging the OTAs, but that has them stuck on the OTAs. As I mentioned, my wife and I, that's what we do. We focus on Airbnb because it's a side business. It's not something that we're trying to grow. So you have this segment of the market that is really ingrained in the OTAs and the tools that they have. And it's going to be a difficult shift for those people. It's going to be a difficult shift for the upper end that has too much, but we've got to find the balance in the middle to figure out what is it that we need, and maybe a little bit more specific to your question. So what I think you've got to do, and this is where it starts, is you get people on OTAs who say, I want direct bookings. Well, as soon as you say that, that means you need a website. And if you need a website, then you probably need a PMS. So I think it goes from there. So I think it's website, it's PMS. I'd be hard pressed to say that you don't need an operations tool. There are very few PMSs out there, if any, that have an operations tool that is going to provide enough functionality for people in the field and people in the back office, depending on scale, right? And we could all argue about where does scale start, 10, 25, 50, whatever number you want to pick. I think you grow out of the PMS tools relatively quickly. PMSs, I think, their goal is to sell to the broadest audience. Their goal is not necessarily to go as deep as they possibly can in any one of the functionalities. That's why you have these third-party tools that pop up. So I think it would be website, PMS, operations tool, You've got to have keyless access. You've got to have some of this smart home tech. And I know Minut is thinking about some new things that are coming out. I think that there's going to be this discussion around safety that's going to continue to happen, that I think tech is going to be one of these main responsibilities for. So I think we have this tech stack that is coming, but right now it's way too overcomplicated. And the last thing I'll say about the tech stack, and I think this has been an issue in the industry for quite some time, is the integration between the tech. The integration just has not been great. And there's a number of reasons for that. There's gatekeepers on the PMS side that see the integrations as a revenue opportunity. And then there's other people who see it as more of an open marketplace. But I think that in order for the industry to truly evolve and to truly leverage the technology that's out there, I think we've got to have much stronger integrations between the tools so that we can leverage all of them across and make the property manager's life easier. I think at the end of the day, this is an industry that is led by property managers. And the tech, I think to some degree, because there was bigger dollars and bigger companies behind it, they've tried to sort of strong arm what happens within the property management side of it. And I think that what I would suggest is that's probably shifting. I think that the property managers will probably continue to get some more control. And it could be that AI is going to give property managers more ability to build some of this stuff in-house. But I think the vendors are going to see the need for that as well. They're going to see people that have more of an open mindset, vendors that have more of an open mindset are going to start to get market share, and they're going to realize, oh, well, we've got to do a much better job in integration. I think the challenge with that is whether or not the job can be done, how long the job will take, and who's going to really get it done right.
Yeah, I think AI, it's going to influence the dynamics quite a lot here. Like, even though we're all focused on the guest experience, right? Like, that's the core at everything, and everything sort of flows from that. AI now makes it a lot easier to develop software, for example, which I think is contributing to the overlap that you're talking about. And from a vendor perspective, and I'm a vendor, you end up with these requests from customers who might only be using your product and Airbnb. All right. So you have to build a bit of an operations tool for, supporting them. Right. And you might have to build out a few other things that would already be in some PMSs, but not in others. And I think it's very, very important that we as an industry, accept that overlap will be there, and then have a relatively low ego, and to make sure that these things play really well together. And that if you have to collaborate between a PMS and another type of vendor, that we make it really, really easy and make these two-way connections that are necessary. And I think the industry has some way to go there still. And I think it's just going to get worse when we get agents trying to use many different systems at the same time and getting all synced up.
Yeah, well, I think you made a really strong point there that I overlooked as I was talking about a lot of this, is the market is very different from the long tail smaller hosts to the larger managers, and the needs are very different. Yes, there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of similarities, but the needs are different. That manager, that host that is only on Airbnb and wants Minut to do this development is going to have much different needs than the manager that's got 1,000 units that's asking Minut to make some changes. They're just going to be very, very different. And as a result, I think a lot of the vendors in this space have sort of chosen one side or the other. They've said either I'm going to go on the host side and the long tail side of it, or I'm going to focus on more of that enterprise, larger manager side of it. And I think that it makes it challenging on the vendor and the developer side to decide what is it that we focus on and how do we do it. The other part of this, and I think that potentially this is something that vendors have to get better at, because a lot of the revenue or future profit is going to be in the smaller host side of it. That's just the reality. That's where the industry is growing. Yes, there'll be more consolidation. Yes, there'll continue to be larger managers, but you get through that market relatively quickly. The industry from a vendor side has historically not done a great job of building a product for both of them and making an offering that is really seamless and easy. Minut has. I give you guys a lot of credit from a UI perspective, from a marketing perspective, from an adoption and an onboarding perspective. You guys nailed that. And I think that the industry as a whole has not done very well at selling to the smaller side, because if they do, they sacrifice the sales on the large side, which they're all sort of chasing because it's the bigger dollars faster. But I do think that the long tail, the smaller end, is going to drive a lot of this industry over the next few years. And smaller could mean a lot to different people, but I'd say 10, 20 units, that's where a lot of the industry is going to gravitate towards. And as we mentioned before, there's not going to be a sacrifice in quality down there. The same guest experiences are going to be needed there. The same homeowners experiences are going to be needed there. So we're going to have to service that sort of 10 to 50 in the same way that we service the 50 to 1,000.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the reason, or at least part of the reason why vendors have often skewed towards the larger PMs is really the dynamics in how you scale sales. Right. So historically you have scaled sales by cold calling, and you had SDRs doing outreach, and it was a quite labor intensive process. And it was the same amount of labor whether you were reaching out to someone with 500 properties or 50 or 5. But again, like, I think that's an area where we actually have to question, is that going to be the case going forward? And is there new ways to reach more customers in a more cost effective way, which I think could change that dynamic, where maybe like some of these, smaller segments could be almost equally easy to reach from a customer point of view. Cause it's been a bit of like on the very small end, like where you have almost consumer like behavior, you have a playbook with advertising and Instagram influencers, etc., where you can reach relatively cost efficiently. And then you had to sort of get to an average contract value of, I'm going to say 10,000 at the minimum, but probably more in order to get like good unit economics in your funnel. Whereas the middle was quite difficult. And I have hope that is another thing that AI is changing the dynamics around, and that we can actually cost efficiently market and service that portion of the market. And I don't think it's entirely a coincidence that when we look at the actual guest satisfaction and like having high review scores on Airbnb, etc., it's often not the smallest, but also not the largest, like sort of the relatively small operators that consistently delivers the best guest experience. And so it might not be such a bad thing for the industry, actually. Let's see these two things converge.
I think you're spot on. From a sales perspective, that's you nailed it. From a and me sitting in a sales role for a long time, it's probably easier for me to sell a manager with 500 doors than it is for me to sell a manager with 5 doors, just because there's a lot more hand-holding and explaining and education that has to go into that smaller side of it. So at the small end, you almost want it to be DIY, which, to your point, you can manage from a marketing perspective. Not a lot of people in this industry have figured it out, but there is ways to onboard people from a DIY perspective on that small side of things. I think that's how you manage that. It's the middle ground that I think is the hardest part. And I would agree. I'm hopeful that AI may help that. I think the outreach is probably the hardest, and then the one-to-one sales when you get to them is hard. And if the dollars don't justify the time that it takes to sell, then it's going to be very, very hard to get people to focus on that. But I'm with you. I think that new marketing approaches, AI technology, the ability to move faster at scale, I think that's probably what changes that. I think the other part of that is just the consumers leveraging AI as well. And when we do that, and this goes back to, I think what we're doing here is generating really valuable content to put back into the universe and the industry so that it's found. And when we do that, I think AI is going to help. Great content, I think, and this goes back to the marketing comments, I think great content is what's going to continue to move the industry, because that's what Google is looking for. That's what AI is looking for. They're looking for the authority in the industry based on whatever the question or the keyword is. So the more value and authority and thought leadership we can put out there, I think the higher chances are that you end up in the right searches at the right time.
I should probably have considered the AI bots when I wrote these questions. I didn't think of that.
It'll speed you up next time.
Yeah. To wrap up on a more personal note, everyone in property management has a bit of a crazy story about something that happened. Which one is your favorite?
Well, so I'll give a management one, and then I'll just sort of talk maybe a little bit more broadly across the industry. So early on, and this I guess speaks a little bit to how the review system is probably broken in the industry, and maybe a little bit more specifically around Airbnb driving the broken nature of reviews. But early on, a number of years ago, when my wife and I started managing properties, we had a guest that came through. We had all 5 stars. I don't know how many reviews. Let's say it was 20. And then we get a guest who comes in, and starts blowing up the messages saying that there are cockroaches all over the house. Or maybe he didn't even. Maybe he just complained while he was there. But the review that was left on Airbnb was that there were cockroaches all over the house. They were on his pillow. They were in his bed. No pictures, just the claims that this was happening. And it sent my wife on a tizzy for at least a week because, as we know, Airbnb isn't responsive. Airbnb isn't going to take that review down. So she had to mentally get around the fact that, yes, guests can be crazy and they might say something that is crazy, but hopefully over time, the reviews are going to play themselves out and people will see that. So needless to say, we do not have cockroaches crawling on the pillows, and we've had a tremendous amount of good reviews that have come after that. So we're in a good place. But ultimately, I think bigger picture, when I think about the industry at large, I'm still amazed at the amount of money, funding, private equity that has come into this industry that has been burned up without really an understanding of what went wrong or why things failed. And I continue to be astounded by the amount of strong money and really smart people that think that this industry is easy, and then they get into it and realize how really difficult it is. And I'm sure that happens in every industry in a lot of different ways. But we've seen a tremendous amount of money just sort of disappear in this industry. And I think there's more to come. I don't think that the money that's pouring in now is necessarily going to have an easier time. In fact, I'd probably argue it's going to have a harder time because, as we've talked about, profit is becoming more and more important. And generating that profit in this industry during challenging times like this, I think, is going to be that much more difficult.
If it was easy, everyone would be doing it.
There you go.
Thank you so much for coming, Adam. It's a pleasure to speak to you, as always.
Yeah, it was nice chatting with you, Nils. Thanks for the time.
Thank you for listening to Minute by Minute. If today's episode gave you fresh insight, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Share this episode with your team and follow us on social media to continue the conversation and exchange your own operational stories. To learn more about privacy-first property protection, visit minute.com. Until next time, make every minute count to maintain your property's safety.